one.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Tracy Sabetta with Moms Clean Air Force, and I'm a member of the Ohio Equity Team. The Equity Team is a committee of the Ohio Energy Table, funded in part by the Reamp Energy Network. We're so pleased for the return of our monthly speaker series, Equity as it relates to environmental justice and climate resiliency. It's the goal of the team to encourage members of Ohio's BIPOC communities to be more engaged with issues of health, the environment, and to ensure community voices are heard by our decision makers. So on behalf of the Equity Team, we appreciate you giving us your time today. I've been looking forward to today's conversation, as I'm sure you all have been as well. There will be time for questions during today's event, so please feel free to drop them in the chat box at any time during the conversation. And today's conversation is a little different for us. We will be focusing on how racial and ethnic minority groups bear a disproportionate burden of COVID-19, with higher rates of infection, hospitalization, and death compared to whites. With that, I will hand it over now to Saronica Powell, a member of our Equity Team, for introductions and to kick off our conversation. Saronica?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Today we have two wonderful speakers that will be joining us today to discuss information around COVID and how it impacts our community, as well as how it has impacted them. Our first speaker is Vivian Taylor. She's a public health professional who utilized her macro social work skills to assist in building relationship and organizing community conversation with disadvantaged populations around COVID-19 as an effort to educate them on the pros and cons of COVID-19 vaccination. She conducted interviews with community leaders to learn about their response to the vaccine and organized COVID-19 vaccine clinics with barbershop and other non-traditional places. Additionally, when the opportunity presented itself for her to obtain the COVID-19 vaccination, she did so without hesitation. With that, she utilized that as an opportunity to educate her family, her community, and others, especially with many of them knowing the history around vaccination as it relates to the background for communities of color. Although her attempt did not result in many members of her communities getting vaccinated, she did not internalize it as her background in social work. Because of her background, it gave her the ability to understand that the community of colors had a great distrust to vaccination that was rooted in decades of distrust of American healthcare system. It's not ideal for people of marginal groups whose ancestors was experimented on and not provided proper care to be trusting of a vaccine, says Vivian. Moving forward, Vivian feels that health equity policies need to be developed and implemented to begin building trust with communities of colors, along with other disadvantaged communities. Vivian holds a BA in nonprofit administration from Cleveland State University and a master's of social work from the University of Michigan. Today, Vivian will share more about her experience of working in public health during the COVID-19 pandemic. Once Vivian is finished, and I'll just read both bios now, because of the fact I want to make sure we have enough time for both individuals to speak and share as much as they can. So our second speaker would be Yvonka Hall. She's currently the executive director of the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition. She's a permanent community leader in Cleveland and serves on numerous boards and committees. She is a proud mother and grandmother, deeply and passionate and involved in social justice. She is a former candidate of Ohio State Representatives, whether it's speaking against environmental issues, systematic racism, cardiovascular disease, infant mortality, domestic violence, health disparities, mental health, juvenile justice, employment, education, or hosting community forum. She used her voice to make a difference in the lives of others. The 1974 murder of her mother, Yvonne Boston Hall, dramatically changed her life. Her childhood promise was to use her life to help others, has led to the creation of cutting-edge programs and impacted thousands of people's lives. Yvonka holds a BA in political science from Notre Dame and an MPA from Texas Southern University. She has the distinguished honor of being a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow Ladder and leadership development in next generation of community health leaders. Yvonka has just returned from Phoenix, Arizona, where she was a recipient of the 100 Women to Know in America. Since March 2020, the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition has worked to shine the light on inequities experienced in African American community and the long-term impact of COVID-19. So as I stated, our first speaker is going to be Miss Vivian. So Miss Vivian, welcome.
Hey.
The floor is all yours.
All right, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Veronica. So I'm not really sure where to start, so I'm just gonna talk because I like to have a conversation with people instead of talking at people.
Okay.
As you guys heard in the bio, I am not a holder of a public health degree, yet I do work in public health as a macro social worker. And the reason being is that social workers are really high skilled when it comes to community organizing and outreach, and building relationships that are needed for many different things. And public health is no exception to that. And the reason why I was attracted to the public health field is that a lot of my jobs already included public health, just not at the health department per se. But I would just say that, hey, working in a pandemic really was not something myself or anyone else anticipated. In fact, it was my first job out of grad school, and I just did not know what to expect. Nonetheless, I just knew within 3 weeks of working at my job, I was just thrown into working on COVID-19 vaccine clinics to begin with, or messaging to begin with. And it was a lot because, you know, we can say that we're trained and prepared for everything, but I like to say that we're not. That's just my personal opinion because we were never really prepared to function in a pandemic as a country, I would say. I just know that, huh?
Okay, you said you wanted some questions. How would you say
Sure, go
COVID
ahead and ask.
impacting the community now, as you know?
How's COVID-19 impacting the community now?
Yes.
I would say that we're in a very bizarre place and that the pandemic is still present, but many of us are living as if it's not. And of course, that's not by choice. I think it's just capitalism. And by that, it means that, hey, we are all part of a system where we have to go to work to pay our bills, and we have to do things. And people also want to be able to live again. Many people lost so much in the pandemic. We lost, you know, major milestones that even myself included. I wasn't able to graduate traditionally from college, right? Have a graduation party. I wasn't able to go straight into my jobs. A lot of my job offers got rescinded. The same is true for many people. A lot of folks have plans to go to concerts, vacations, you know, their kids starting 3rd grade and prom, and all of that was lost. So many of us that are getting the vaccine or not are like, you know, COVID must be teaching some people that we only live once and we have a life that we feel entitled to live, right? I also want to, you know, center the fact that as marginalized people, and by that I mean Black and Brown people, as well as those who have disabilities, and the list goes on, we're also more than likely to be at frontline work. So we are your cashiers, we are your servers, we're your waiters. So there really isn't a per se escape from, you know, COVID per se, as it is to others who have privilege. Like it's a privilege to be able to work from home, right? But unfortunately, for many of us don't have that privilege. Research has shown that many of the people that were let go during the pandemic were people that had, the frontline jobs. Once again, your daycare workers, right? Industry was, you know, killed overnight, per se. Um, and with that, I just think that people are always like, oh, we didn't do enough to keep ourselves safe, but we were not even given the opportunity because we were forced to go to work. And a lot of parents, guardians, or individuals, was like, well, I got to pay bills. I can't not just go to work, and it's hard to get another job. I just think it's a really bizarre place to be, that we are forced in this country, as well as others, to work under a pandemic and live life as if everything is normal, as if it's not impacting us.
Okay, so can you talk about your decision to get the COVID-19 shot and how you utilize that to impact communities of colors, or try to encourage others or educate them, better yet?
Okay, so my decision to get vaccinated was never a if, but when, per se. Um, I'm privileged in that I have relationships with, pharma colleges, also people that are, medical sciences. Like, college was great because I had roommates that were like smarter than me. Okay, so they were always doing microbiology stuff. I was like, okay, so I made sure that I had conversations with them to begin with. I asked a lot of questions, and as a result, I felt very comfortable getting the vaccine. And I felt that by me getting the vaccine, especially being younger, per se, okay, this ain't no shade, um, it would be also ideal to encourage people who are Black and young, like myself, to get the vaccine. Because there were so many, myths and untrue things being said, misinformation around the vaccine, that, oh, they're going to kill you, they're going to steal your DNA. And this is like, listen, around me, I'm surrounded by a lot of death. So much death that I don't even think that, like others, I got time to really mourn, right? And because of that, it's just like, yeah, I'm getting the vaccine. Forget all y'all misinformation people. I'm going to get the vaccine. All right. And in the process, I also learned more about the flu vaccine as well. I learned that, hey, the way I explained the COVID-19 vaccine is that it's really just something to protect you from the virus. That realistically, yes, you're going to get it, but the impact of getting it would be very different if you had not had it, right? So for me, I got vaccinated. I probably had like 2 or 3 days of downtime of like, oh my goodness, I have a brain fog. I'm sleepy, and I'm okay with getting more sleep. Okay. And after those 3 days, everything felt normal. So I'll call my brothers, like, are y'all going to get the vaccine? And my brothers are like, nope, 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 nope. 2 of them did get the vaccine though. In my friend group, everyone got vaccinated, which I'm very happy about. And then even in the local community that I live in, Lorain County, I would hang out in Elyria, Lorain, and I like just being incognito, if you will. I don't like to take my job badge with me everywhere. I felt that sometimes just by having a conversation with people about the vaccine, um, as a regular person, they were more open to listening to me. And also, I had to be very open to listening to them, right? About their fears and validating their fears. When they bring up the whole Tuskegee study, it's like, yes, you're right. That was a very tragic incident. In fact, my family comes from Birmingham and Tuskegee, Alabama, right? And so this directly impacted my family. And then I would just clarify that actually they did not vaccinate them. They lied and said they were vaccinating them, right? And that's the reason why syphilis got so out of hand with the community, right? And it also resulted in us distrusting the government, like we're doing right now, by not wanting to get the COVID-19 vaccine. So you're right with that, perspective. Um, but we also know that, Uncle Sam like to make his money, you know. You may not be able to make money if you don't get vaccinated, because a lot of jobs have mandated, certain jobs that if you don't get vaccinated, you can't work here, right? How would
Another
you?
question we have is, do you find that many were impacted because their water was shut off or other utilities were shut off during the pandemic?
I didn't hear a lot about other people being impacted by COVID-19 because of the water being shut off, or utilities at all. It was more so just a matter of no. And it was really out of fear and distress. A lot of the same sentiments that I got were, this is too new. This vaccine is too new. They did this overnight. And then having to educate them even further of most of the medicine that we have is new. Medicine is always evolving. And I even try to, reason with them by using, examples of, you used to be able just to die from cancer. Do you think the first person that was able to get cancer treatment was like, nope, I'd rather die. I don't know what y'all doing. No, they got treatment because they wanted to live, right? The same thing now. I even, highlight the fact that chickenpox is not even common right now in kids. All right. I had chickenpox when I was a kid, but now my nieces and nephews, they know nothing about the chickenpox life. All right. Because the vaccine was developed within that time period. And getting people to recognize that, oh, like, you mean to tell me that your kid was getting vaccinated and you didn't know what your child was getting vaccinated for? So it just goes to show that there needs to be way more education. And it made me wonder if, medical professionals are educating, parents and guardians, especially those who are marginalized, on, vaccines, collectively. Instead of saying, well, they're not going to understand, I'm going to inject you. Because I just feel like this also, created a lot more distrust.
Okay, we do have another question. How would you relate the disappropriate impact of COVID-19, other disappointed appropriation impacts, such as higher energy burden and higher asthma rates?
I would say that it's been out of 10. It is no secret that those who had a prior medical issue, whether it's asthma, chronic disease, they were more susceptible to getting COVID-19. And a lot of that goes to environmental racism, going into the social determinants of health here. Your health is impacted where you work, live, and play. And unfortunately, because of a history of redlining that still holds true today, Blacks, Hispanics, Asians are typically all shuffled to poor neighborhoods. We're exposed to a lot of pollutions and living in houses with a lot of lead, which, results in us having high asthma rates. So with that, it's no secret as to why, COVID-19 disproportionately impacted those very same communities. In a way that I think a lot of jobs were not even aware that some people really lost their whole families, right? Their whole family, because, they already had some diagnosis that they were managing, and then this virus comes around and it was like eating at their immune system. And that's where I go back to the fact that, like, poverty is dangerous because we're not willing to take care of our, countrymen. Your country is only as good as your countryman is. And I think about all of the frontline staff that had to go work at the grocery stores and how them being exposed to people with the virus, then, followed them home. And that's how they lost their whole family, right? In a community that already didn't have resources to help address these issues. So for me, it's always out of 10. That if it's a scale of 1 to 10, we was at the absolute worst.
So if you had to, there was a bit of information that you thought was the most important for communities to know, especially communities of color, as they try and continue to maneuver this pandemic, what would that be?
My tips are always going to be to, number one, I validate everyone's fear of getting vaccinated. okay? And I can also say that it's been 2 years. I strongly encourage you to talk to those that you have access to that have been vaccinated to learn about their experiences, to see how often they've been sick, to get in touch with medical professionals, who are more than willing to spend the time to educate you about vaccine and the importance of them. And not just the COVID one, we're also talking about the flu vaccine, all right? Every year, Black and Hispanic people are 4 more times likely to be hospitalized due to complications of not getting the flu vaccine. And so a lot of the sickness that we get can be prevented if we just, got vaccinated, which is not simple because once again, we're going back to the distrust that the medical system has created. Um, I always encourage everyone to mask, always mask, and find fun activities to do because I too believe that we all deserve joy and we deserve to live and not exist in any space. So find, some activities that are not high exposure to COVID-19 vaccine. And I admit wearing these masks is getting old. I'm tired of it. And for a while I got lazy. And now that I see the numbers going up, I'm putting like 2 to 3 masks on. It is just that. All right. Wash your hands as much as possible. All right. Have your little community built up of people that you feel comfortable around who is not, exposing themselves, beyond what they can control, because we all know that work forces us to be exposed whether we want to be or not. So protect yourself. And go, like I said, if you can't read, because that's also an issue, be willing to listen to someone. All right. Because not all of us are out to get you. All right. Those would be my tips.
Thank you so much, Miss Vivian. That was fabulous. So next, we're going to bring in now Miss Yvonka to the call and let her pick up where you left off and talk about COVID and share with us the information that she knows around COVID and that she thinks is important for the community. The floor is all yours, Yvonka.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Vivian. Good to see you. Saronica, as always, and your hair is fly, girl. Um,
Thank
and
you.
Jocelyn, just letting you know that I love you so much that I raced back here to fight with this computer to be here for you all today. But for me, I think that one of the things that we should understand about COVID is that the United States is in a crisis, that we have a pandemic, we have a policing issue, and then we have prejudice. We have to understand how those things all play out on a grander scale and how they disproportionately impact our community. For people who are asthmatic or who live in underprivileged communities, one of the things that we do understand is around the number of carbon emissions, particulate matter, those things that were disproportionately impacting the communities before COVID. So we had all these things prior to COVID. That COVID just shine a light, a very bright, glaring, blinding light on the inequities that the African American communities were already talking about. Um, the other part of it was for us was around this whole availability of testing, which we still have a lack of testing sites in African American communities. If you don't have a CVS or a Walgreens in your community, you're not going to be able to get a test. And then the other thing about those locations is that not only do we not have them in our community, but even in our communities that have them, there's a month wait. So how can you wait for a month in order for you to find out test results? The other thing was about vaccinations. When we talk about this access and accessibility, one part of it is that we have to understand that having access and accessibility are two different things. So we said, hey, we made this, we made access to the vaccines easy for the community because we did it at an arena that's downtown. Okay, well, I don't know whose community was targeted, but that's not accessible to community members. So if you have community members who are working, who are disabled, who are raising children, all of those things put them off of the grid in order for them, or have transportation issues. Those things are not accessible to them. So access and accessibility are two different things. The other thing that we do know for sure is that African Americans were 3 times more likely to get COVID, 2 times more likely to die from COVID, and our children This is where our work comes in, and this is where I'll get to you with what we did. Um, African American children were 2.4 times more likely to become orphaned as a direct result of COVID. And so we have to understand that a lot of children, particularly African American children, are being raised in kinship households. So they're being raised by aunts, uncles, cousins, or grandparents. I was raised by my grandmother. And so with my grandparents, if COVID had come around when I was young, the possibility of my grandmother or grandfather dying and leaving me alone is very real. So we now have a lot of young people who are um, going from homes where they had grandparents to now they're aging out and not having anyone to turn to. So we're going to have to be the voice for these young people and make sure that they're getting the resources that they need. The other one is that now we have younger children who are being thrown into systems because they don't have anyone that is available to take them in. They've had lots of family members that have died. For me, I've had 65 plus friends pass away from COVID complications. I had a young woman that I have known since I was a child, who in the very first part of COVID, which was in 2019, let's make that clear, 2019, when people started having these illnesses in the United States that we couldn't quite diagnose, but we were saying that they were having respiratory distress and we didn't know what it was. She went to the doctor and said, I'm ill. And I'm already asthmatic, but I can't breathe. So for months, she was having some issues. And then finally one day on the computer, she put on a note on Facebook and said, I really cannot breathe. Now remember this, we already have medical systems that say that black pain is not the same as white pain, right? So that
Right.
means that black people can be at a 30 on pain threshold. And we come in and say, they say, on the scale, where are you 1 to 10? And for us, because we've always constantly lived in pain, we may say 5, right? And so they have negated the fact that we said a 5. Okay, well, you're 5, you'll feel better. So this young woman didn't feel better. She went home, and that afternoon, a few hours later, her daughters posted on Facebook, "Rest in heaven, mommy." That was one of my first classmates that passed away. Um, and she had just celebrated her 52nd birthday, because I'll be 55 this year. So this is almost 3 years ago. And gone. And then I think about other people who have passed away from COVID, who are within the age group as me. And so what happens when we lose um, our people who are in the workforce? um so lose our essential workers, people who are working in the workforce, people who are in the prime of their lives. um we have industries that are now saying, oh, people don't want to work, because of COVID, and they're not coming to work, and that has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with is that we've lost a lot of people within those working ages, because of COVID and the years of potential life lost that COVID has had on them. How COVID affects our population, and I'm going to read off my notes because y'all know I had COVID, so I have memory lapses over here.
That's okay.
Is chronic disease, food insecurity. Was a big thing, because remember the first part of COVID, we were telling people stay home for that 5 to 14 days. And so how are you going to source food for 5 to 14 days when you're living day to day? Essential employment, increased our risk for employment, as Vivian talked about. um, and then economic employment in essential jobs. For me, and for many of us, we are very blessed. I'm able to work from home, and my staff is able to work from home. But we have so many people who cannot work from home, and so it doesn't matter where you're at, whether you were in blue collar or white collar. We have people who don't want to wear masks. We have people that don't want to back up. We have people that don't want to wash their hands, and we have people who will not vaccinate. And that is black and white. So when we look at the numbers across the board, rich white people are vaccinated, poor black people are not. So for me, my advice to us is we need to follow their lead. Rich white people are making sure that they are vaccinated, and poor black people are not vaccinated.
So
And I
Yvonka,
have.
how do you think
Mhm.
we can change that narrative?
So I think that part of it is around making sure that we have the testing available, making sure that we have vaccination clinics available, because out of sight is out of mind. And so when we have, political leaders that are telling people that, it's that we need to get over it, that COVID has gone away, that they're tired of even wearing a mask, that we need to make sure that our narrative is the same. I just came back from Arizona, and almost every day, like, I watched their different commercials that they had around COVID. Um, and they did a very good job of talking to their folks around about COVID, and doing this whole diversity around commercials, and then how they were getting the messages out. And so, I don't see that as much, in our community. So I think that part of it is how we relay these messages. And then I also have to understand that I have members of my team, um, that are not directly my workers, but are part of the volunteers who are not vaccinated, who are saying to me they're not going to be vaccinated until September because they think that the vaccine has been tested by then. One of the things that we should know about the vaccine is that the vaccine, they didn't just start developing a vaccine during the Obama administration. They knew that something was coming up, that it was some other things that were going on, that had gone on prior to, and that they started working on things. What would they do? Um, in a lab in order to get something that if it came around something viral or something attacked certain things. And so that work had been started, but then that work was stopped by the last administration. That whole office was defunded. And so hopefully hoping that we'll make sure that we keep that line item in and that those things are funded from now on. Particularly looking at the number of losses that we have had, not only across the country but here in the state of Ohio, and understanding that COVID-19 is not choosing Blacks as victims. The virus is highlighting the disparities that existed before its emergence. The disparities related to COVID-19 highlight the need for innovations, interventions to mitigate the effects of the disease in Blacks in Northeast Ohio. COVID-19 has a greater effect on minorities and results in greater loss of life. Um, we all should be treated equal. When we're talking about um, COVID, and when we're talking about our access around medical care, who gets what, why, and when. And then that brings you to my story. So 491 days ago, um, so about 465 days ago, my life changed. Um, my grandmother, so my uncle went to visit a friend. His friend was an RTA bus driver who did not believe in COVID, right? So there were a large number of RTA drivers that died or their wives died. We've actually highlighted a young man he brought it home to his wife. His wife was pregnant. She died. The baby lived. And he's left to raise two children. Um, and so he went to his house to drop off something. The young man did not tell my uncle that he was sick at all. So when my niece came to visit, it was her. She was pregnant. She had a 1 year old, a 5 year old, her boyfriend, and then I already had another niece and her husband who were all at my grandmother's house, along with my uncle and my grandmother. He brought it to all of us. So when he got COVID from his friend, he didn't realize what he had, because his symptoms were mild, right? So his symptoms were mild. He gave it to my grandmother. He gave it to his two daughters. He gave it to his grandchildren. He gave it to his son in laws. He gave it to me. Working to save my grandmother, who at the time, my grandmother was 89 years old. um, I got it. I got COVID from her, and it was before the vaccination was available. And we had all talked about as soon as the vaccination was available that we were going to get vaccinated because for us, my grandmother's life was paramount to none. Like we wanted to make sure that if nothing else happened, that she lived. And so she ended up with COVID. And so for us, it was this fight to the finish. Like, how do we make sure that we're keeping her safe? So Kayla was pregnant with Drew, and Kia, my youngest niece, tested positive. So she was 1 years old and she tested positive. She still has some issues. She's 2 years old. She sleeps a lot for a 2 year old. Um, she doesn't speak um, a lot at all for a 2 year old. We think this is directly tied to COVID. Her brother, who his mom was pregnant with at the time, also has some problems that we think is directly tied to COVID. My niece who had Crohn's disease, COVID causes blocked bowels. So COVID blocked her bowels and she had to have emergency surgery. Her husband had, and I'm not talking about old people. Let's get this together. I'm talking about these young women are in their 20s, right? Um, my uncle had some initial muscle weakness and fatigue, which he still has muscle weakness. Now he's my age, so I'm 55, so he's right there with me. My older uncle, who was 66 at the time, um, he developed blood clots all over his body. COVID causes blood clots, y'all. So let's make sure that we understand that. One day I went to see him. He said, I'm having some issues with my arm. He kept putting his arms up and he said, I'm just, and he kept shaking it. And I said, do you need to go to the doctor? And he said, no, I'm good. I don't want to go to the doctor. Um, because I don't want to get COVID, not realizing that we all had COVID and that he had it too. And so the next day when I went to see him, his arm had went from my complexion to white. So his arm went from this to this to this. They had to amputate his arm. So he had blood clots all over his body and had to have his arm amputated as a direct result of COVID. COVID causes blood clots, blood clotting all over your body. He had blood clots in his feet, his toes, hands. So they had to amputate his left arm. Um, and the impact was felt immediately. Like for him, he said, they took me in a room, and when I came out, I didn't have an arm. Um, 66 years old. And so for me, what happened is I got sick, really sick. I have some other health challenges. I don't have diabetes, hypertension, or anything like that, but I have thyroid cancer. Um, and so immediately, um, my team member from Cincinnati and from California both sent me a message that probably came to my phone within seconds of each other and said, Yvonka, you need to go take a myclonal antibody because otherwise we think that you're going to die. Um, my breathing was labored. I went to the emergency room. They said, don't you can't wait until it's time for you to go to the hospital. If you wait, they're not going to give you the medicine. Um, and you're not going to make it anyway. And so I went to the emergency room. I asked for the myclonal antibody. I was denied the myclonal antibody, even though antibodies existed at the time. There was 300,000 units that were created. They were produced for rural communities and not urban centers. Um, and so I had to demand that I got the antibody. Um, One of the ladies who happened to work in the emergency room was an African American woman who knew me from the neighborhood. She walked in and said, I know a Yvonka Hall. She's an activist. And I said, well, that would be me. And so when the doctor walked out and said something to them on the floor, I guess, to the tune of, we're not giving her that medicine, she said, I think either you give it to her or the news comes. And a few minutes later, a nurse came and administered the myclonal antibody to me, which was belantamab. I took that antibody and it made a lot of my symptoms disappear immediately, like my breathing became regular, but I started having like some regular, just like COVID, issues around hair loss. COVID causes hair loss. If you read it in the news or seen it in the news, COVID causes hair loss. Um, I had the chills, fever, aches, all of those things that go along with it, but I lived. My grandmother, who was 89 years old at the time, is now 91. My grandmother lived. My grandmother had some brain fog where she couldn't remember me at the very beginning, but she's doing a lot better. Um, and for us, that is a great thing. And so we have to make sure that we're being vigilant about COVID And so for my organization, we have been very vigilant because we understand the impact of COVID. I understand how it impacted my life. And then in December, my brother got COVID. He had taken 2 vaccinations during our clinics because we started hosting vaccination clinics in the community. Um, and he was on oxygen for 4 months. He was in the hospital for 10 days on oxygen. And then they released him. He got sick again. They put him back on oxygen. And so he was on oxygen for some time. He's doing a lot better now. He never had the brain fog, but the breathing was labored. Um, and he always says, not getting the vaccine is like playing Russian roulette with your life. And so he talks about that. We actually, my team produced a documentary about COVID. It's called Black COVID Dorona. It's available on YouTube. It's an hour long. It has 9 impactful stories about COVID, people who experienced COVID, had loss, are long haulers, and the impact on them. I would encourage you all to watch it. I think that it's a way for people to really understand what COVID did to families. And so the other thing that we were doing is food distributions. Part of that, the food distribution piece, was because we knew that if we did not um, make sure that people had food at home, that a lot of elders who were raising their children or grandchildren in kinship families would lose their lives. So we work to do that, hosting vaccination clinics. We've hosted focus groups on mis and disinformation. Also, we have a support group that we do every single month. We've surveyed people around mis and disinformation because for us, we want to know how we can make improvements so that we can help people in order to get them to the vaccination sites. We've also provided PPE equipment for the community. And we had a billboard campaign. So our billboard campaign is called The Ups. It went into 11 areas throughout Northeast Ohio. And so the Ups, including Lorraine, Vivian. So the Ups campaign talks about um, masking up, backing up, washing up, and rolling up your sleeves for the vaccination. So for us and for my community, this is very much real. For my family who's been impacted, I pray that people's families aren't impacted like mine. But for me, I will continue to work to make sure that we understand that the United States is still in crisis. We are in crisis mode, and we have to act like we are. We need to continue to wear masks, people. We need to make sure that if we are not vaccinated, that we get vaccinated. And we need to make sure that if we do not have vaccination sites in our communities, that we fight like hell to get them. And that if we do not have access to testing sites, that we do those also. This is imperative. This is our number one priority is to make sure people live, not whether stores are able to open up tomorrow. We want to make sure that people can walk out their house tomorrow. And they can't walk out of their house if we're not doing everything that we can to keep them safe. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so
Yes.
much, Yvonka, for that. Thank you for sharing your story with us. And we're going to bring Vivian back as well because we do have a couple of questions in the chat. And then we'll go through the questions that are in the chat. And either one, and Tracy, you can bring Tracy on as well. She's going to assist with Q&A. But either one of you ladies can answer these questions. There's one in the chat from Abby. That says, how can we make a difference in our workplace when they look to higher ups, but the higher ups are acting like it's over? Are there resources or do we just accept that we're in this alone at work?
I think that's a really hard question, and the only answer I have is that, I think by now we have noticed that we really are in this by ourselves. Working at a health department when COVID was really at its peak, per se, I saw a lot of people just calling in, trying to get letters to verify that they were diagnosed with COVID and that they were supposed to, isolate so that they could, not spread it to someone else. There are people afraid of losing their jobs, and jobs like, I don't care if you got COVID, you're going to come to work anyway. And that just goes back to the systems of capitalism that a lot of us are forced to live under. Some people are more privileged in that they can say, you know what, I can move back home with my, parents, have you, or My husband can pay all the bills and say, forget this job. And some of us don't have that same type of privilege. So, excuse me, piggybacking off what Yvonka said, I too just, encourage people to be very vigilant, make sure you are masking, washing your hands, disinfecting a lot of stuff. Cause I didn't even know that they made to-go Lysol. I didn't know that they had those little mini wipes either. So people be looking at me like I'm a germaphobe, but really like, I don't want to catch COVID. Okay. I got sick recently this week, which I'm still recovering from, and I got COVID test, right? I was thankful not to have COVID, very thankful, right? And a lot of that is by practicing safe behaviors. And sometimes also, if your job is not wearing masks, that doesn't mean that you got to stop, because you have to protect yourself and your family, right? And it's a very unfortunate reality that we live under, but that's this country.
Yeah,
Yvonka?
I think that we definitely need to make sure that we're continuing to mask up. Look, you know my thing: mask up, back up, wash up, roll up. I'm like the ups.
Yeah.
You know, um, but I think that we have other things besides COVID. That have very, very much symptoms like COVID, like norovirus. We have a large contingent of people, like right now, we should be on alert in our health departments and health districts around norovirus, because
Yes.
norovirus, the symptoms look exactly like COVID. You have the fatigue, you have all of these other things that are going on. I think that the other thing too around COVID is that because we sent all these tests to people's homes, we don't know what our numbers are. So if you send 3 tests, now they're sending 8 tests. They sent out a thing the other day that said we're going to send you 8 tests. So remember that our COVID positives are probably 3 times higher than what's being listed. Because we don't know. If anybody tells you that they know, they don't know. All they know is the people who got a test. They don't know about the positives from people who were at home, who tested and who were positive, who ain't telling nobody, right? They don't know about those. They don't know about
Right.
all of these tests that you send home to people who, and now I'm telling you, now you got 8 tests. Do you know how many people are going to be positive, and we're not going to know it at all? And a large majority of those people are in urban areas. They're going to test positive, and because there is no other testing site that's nearby in their community, there is no Walgreens, there is no CVS. It's hard for them to get into the doctor's offices. They already have a mistrust and distrust. Um, but what I would say is that if you are questioning information, that you can go to the truthcheck.org, and have that information fact checked. Get it fact checked. There's a place called truthcheck.org. You go there and
Yeah.
you can get it fact checked. You can come to the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition, to our website, and link on to that, or you can look at the information that we have, or you can call me. We have, for me, you know, I can't tell you um, how important it is for us to understand that this is a crisis. And unless we all work together, to end this, we're going to be going through this a long time. I don't know if Saronica remembers this, but at the early stage of COVID, I said 2024. I've been saying 2024. Jocelyn knows, and I mean
Yeah.
it.
She
I mean
said
it.
it's 2024. That's when you said it was going to take that long for us to get back to some sense of normalcy. So because of the fact that it was going to take that long for actually everyone to kind of like go through their mistrust, their distrust, their false information, and that whole wave, and think it's over, come back, and then
And
once
and a
again rebound.
and
And
a super spread. We're
yes,
gonna have a super spread because
And
people don't listen, and that
yeah.
is one of the realities around a viral, um a mutation, is that you're going to get a super spread, and a lot of people are going to die because people just do not listen.
Well, I also want to, from the social work lens, I just want to highlight that urban communities are definitely disproportionately impacted by COVID, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring up rural communities. Rural communities are really at a big disadvantage. And yes, Black and Brown people do live in those areas as well, where we are very hard up for transportation. Like I live in Lorain County, and there is really no bus system. And although it would be great to say, oh, we got Lyft and Uber, we really don't have enough of those drivers either. So you're really at the mercy of your community. One of the things that social work promotes is mutual aid. So one of my biggest advice to people is to make sure that you have, sustained a community that if you need them to take you to the hospital, the doctor, to go get vaccinated, do that. Many of your local health departments also have um, home services where they could come vaccinate you in your home. Because now that the J&J, like different vaccines work differently, it wasn't until J&J came out that I believe that we were able to do homebound vaccinations because different vaccines have to maintain a particular temperature in order for it to still be good. So the other thing is to make sure you have community. Like, who are your people, right? Who are your people to call if they need something to help you get those groceries, right? To help you go get whatever it is that you may need. Make sure you have those people, and it should at least be 5 at the bare minimum.
And thank you, Vivian, for bringing up rural communities, because of the fact I do think sometimes there are population that are sadly forgotten, and they may not have all the things that urban communities have, access to different services. And we sadly forget or take for granted the things that we do have. So ladies, to wrap this up, we have our final question, and is what is your advice going forward for the BIPOC community? And Vivian, you want to go first?
Sure. I would say to learn as much as possible. Unfortunately, we're in an age where, education is in various forms. I know a lot of us are functionally illiterate. Okay, don't let these degrees fool you that I have, because some things I don't understand when I'm reading them. Okay, so if you need to get on that YouTube, if you need to get an audiobook, if you're listening to this talk, just find a way that fits your learning style to get as much information that you need to make an informed decision about getting vaccinated. Um, because that's the only answer right now that I feel. And just because you may be one of those people that didn't get it, you may have gotten it and don't know because you have a very strong immune system. Because a lot of this is also about individuals' immune system, right? And knowing how, like, hey, it's only a matter of time before it could become weaker and you could have the virus. So keep that in mind. Learn as much as possible. Get to a place that if you're not vaccinated, learn as much information so that you can get vaccinated. Continue masking up. And I will also say, like, right now, there's a lot of jobs popping up everywhere under the legislation of racism as a public health crisis. So even in my new role where I work as a health equity and social justice project coordinator, those roles are popping up everywhere. And so now is the time for, you know, BIPOC people to really hold, people's feet to the fire. You said that racism is a public health crisis. I want to see what you're doing to promote health equity in my neighborhood, right? Are we going to have more access to healthcare? Are we going to have more, water? Are we going to have a better living environment? Are we going to make sure that my house is tested for lead? Like, those are the things that we should be focusing on. So also local elections are coming up. Make sure that you learn more about the candidate that you're voting for. Stop voting just for the big elections of the presidents. Your local elections matter, right? Hence, we are not even able to have the governor, shut down the state if need be right now because of a health crisis because, hey, the powers that be said he could not. So who you put in office is also, excuse me, impacting your public health. So with the local elections coming up, please get to know your candidates. Get to see those who are invested in your public health and mental well-being, who care about you having a healthy living environment as well as working environment moving forward.
Thank you. And Yvonka, and once Yvonka finishes, we have someone else that we're going to bring on, but Yvonka.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you, Vivian. Definitely, elections matter, and who we elect matters, more so than anything else. And making sure that we're, getting people in that understand the issues that are disproportionately impacting the community and are willing to talk about the tough issues. Talking about the pandemic, talking about racism and the impact that it has had on the African American community. And for me, it's not that I forget rural communities because I don't, because otherwise I wouldn't have had billboards in Lorain County and in other rural areas. I work with the African American community, so the 596,000 African American communities that are in Northeast Ohio. Believe you me, I have not forgotten about any of them. For me, it is very important for us to continue to mask up, back up, wash up, roll up your sleeves and take a vaccination. If you don't trust my information, go to truthcheck.org and get their information. But make sure that you are informed. There used to be a store here in Cleveland that was called Sims, and their slogan was the educated customer, consumer is our best customer. And for us, the educated consumer is our vaccinated consumer. So we need to make sure that everybody that can vaccinate, because everybody can, that everybody that can vaccinate vaccinates.
Well, thank you, ladies. All right, everyone, thank you all so much. Before we go, we have Cheryl, who has some information that she's going to share about, it's a resource for the community. So Cheryl, can you unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about the resource that you have?
Sorry, Cheryl left the room for a second. I
Okay,
do
Peggy.
have that information and I will put it in the chat.
So you're going to put it in the chat for us, Peggy?
Yes, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. So what Peggy is putting in the chat is there's a resource going around about different water bills and access to and getting assistance on your water bill. So she'll leave that information in the chat for you. Please go through and check that out and share that with individuals that you may come across because it can be very helpful as far as making sure that if people water bills have been disconnected, and Peggy, correct me if I'm wrong, if they have been disconnected, they're willing to assist in paying those water bills to get their water back turned on.
Yes, yes, and you'll see who qualifies. It's already in the chat, and it's a long link, but that too is coming up. And it is right. Sorry, it takes me a second to post it all. It's a
That's
long
fine.
link, but if you click on it, will open up into a PDF.
Okay, and so now we're going to turn it over to Chad to close us out. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Vivian and Yvonka. What a tremendous amount of information, a little bit overwhelming, but at the same time, it's absolutely necessary. Thank you again for sharing with us. And I also want to say thank you to everyone on the Ohio Equity team and within the Ohio Energy Table. It is a fantastic opportunity for us to be able to present such great and dynamic speakers that you've heard today. And we're looking forward to having this again next month, the third Thursday at high noon. We're going to be talking about energy, jobs, and justice with Representative Juanita Bryant and Casey Weinstein. And it's going to be another great opportunity to hear from some great people about what's going on with within energy, jobs, and justice, but also opportunity for you to ask your questions and to be able to get direct feedback from the people that are directly responsible for this being in the State House here in Ohio. So once again, I want to say thank you to my dear friends, Yvonka and Vivian. It's just great having you all on. I can't thank you enough. But I also want to say, if you're in the Zoom, please fill out the survey. And if and I don't have the copy to the survey, so I may have to email you. As soon as you get it, please fill it out, because that helps us in advising how we're going to further do this in coming months. And I also would like to say thank you again to the members of the team. And if you have any questions or need any assistance, please email askohioequityteam@gmail.com. That is all really one big name there, but and we'll be in touch. If you have anything else in the meantime or by time, it is great and fantastic for you all to join us today. And I'm seeing people falling off like flies. And with that being said, you all have a wonderful and great rest of your day, and a happy May. Bye.